So hello to the Prenatal Alliance community. Thank you for asking me to do this special talk on prenatal parenting and world peace. And for today, I would like to give a presentation entitled Prenatal Parenting and Perinatal Family Care for World Peace. So for today, I'd like to start with just a basic introduction of who I am. For those of you who have not met me, my name is Kate White. I'm a somatic practitioner in private practice, trained to work with early trauma, specifically prenatal birth and attachment trauma. And I started many years ago as a maternal and child health specialist, living and working in Africa. And over a long period of time, starting in the early 1990s, I began to study prenatal work, primarily starting with touch therapy and then moved to understanding pre and perinatal psychology, where I founded the education department for the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology. I've gone on to found other things, including my own center and my own institute in pre and perinatal somatics. But I started as a body worker, moved more to working body and energy, and then really deeply understanding the impacts of trauma in our bodies, especially earliest trauma. So what would it take to support world peace and better health outcomes? Recent trends include maternal and infant mortality, and more than 1,000 women die every day from complications around childbirth or pregnancy. That's one death every 90 seconds. When it comes to how we are working, especially in our country, with overwhelming things, we have a huge problem with opioid and fentanyl addictions. And we have a lot of overdoses now. It's one of the things that is one of the main reasons for death postpartum in our women. But nearly 92,000 persons in the U.S. died from drug-induced overdose in 2020, including illicit drugs and prescription opioids. So birth trauma rates are increasing. According to Penny Simkin, our birth trauma rates vary from 25 to 35% of births, but current trends have seen an escalation of birth trauma because of the pandemic, and some researchers report that the number of births that have traumatic aspects are as high as 45%. Perinatal mood disorders are also on the rise. When I first started teaching the conditions for our health, the rate of postpartum mood disorders was 1 in 20. Now it's 1 in 5. It depends on who you read. I try to stay up on the statistics about what our women are experiencing or what our families are experiencing. But I know that the stress and anxiety and depression that women feel during pregnancy has gone up exponentially since I started teaching. We try to mitigate some of the challenges by creating legislation that will pass laws that will help with maternity and paternity leave, but our country is still one of those countries that has not very many weeks of postpartum maternity and maternity leave. We have a huge problem in the U.S. with disparities. We know that African American women or women of color, no matter what economic conditions you live in, you are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth and 2 to 3 times as likely to have a low-weight baby. We also have challenges with domestic violence. I'm told that homicide is another one of the major killers of women during pregnancy and postpartum in our country. So there are additional themes in our world today, including the invasion of Ukraine, energy and climate crises, starvation and food deserts, poverty, and the refugee issues, especially in our country. So let's plan a world with the baby and the family in mind. So we begin at the beginning, laying down the roots of health. So we're imagining a world where parents and babies thrive, where birth is more satisfying, less stressful, where there's more peace on earth. People are more loving, living more connected lives, not in isolation, more supported. And families are happier. And people of color, their mothers, babies, and people have more equal treatment and better birth outcomes. So I'd like to introduce to you the trauma tree. This is an image that came from a mom. She was trying to illustrate what things that have happened for her family. She's the STEAM-powered family. And she shows here how our prenatal and birth experiences are the roots of our world, like where the soil is the generational experiences, and the roots are our prenatal and birth time. And the tree grows upon this foundation, where the trunk is our early childhood, the branches in the tree are early adulthood, and the canopy is the full adult. So starting from the ground up with preconception, let's create a world that's more peaceful, more connected, and better for our human development. So if you could consider, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. So let's grow our tree a little differently with these various roots that we've been able to identify from the pre and perinatal psychology. We know that they all have layers of experience for human development that we can become very much more conscious of: how we are conceived, how we make a home inside our parent, how we make our body prenatally, the things that happen for our parent. All those things can make a difference on how we are inside ourselves. So here we are with the research on the transgenerational side, where we know that pre to 3 side showing that babies have experiences that are important and can have implications if these experiences are overwhelming, and positive effects if they are soothing and supportive. This is David Chamberlain, who is one of the co-founders of APA, and he said the womb is a school and every baby attends. So the research is strong now that what a baby experiences in utero has big implications or results for how they experience the world after birth and even into adulthood. This is the work of Catherine Monk, and her work was featured in this Parenting Begins Before Birth 0 to 3 issue, where there was a lot of research that showed how what the parent experiences does impact how the baby's nervous system and brain grows in utero. Catherine Monk's research showed that if the mother was stressed during pregnancy, that her pregnancy, or she was anxious, the child is two times more likely to have anxiety or ADHD. So when we're working with families that are getting ready for pregnancy, we want to encourage them to create an intentional space, welcoming a new spirit about creating the space for them to come. We know that half of our pregnancies are not intended. We often say that these pregnancies are mistimed. And if we can really keep families company so that they can really be aware of how they are with their babies and with themselves and with each other, starting before conception or at least during pregnancy. Our greatest spiritual challenge is living in the real world. So I've asked people to consider what is real for you. Many families are struggling with their finances, or to find good food, or to find work, or to have a more regulated, less stressful life. So we're trying to increase our outcomes for a peaceful world by protecting the space of pregnancy, especially early pregnancy. We know that these early imprints build a relationship of health from the start. There's fascinating research that looks at how babies learn in utero. We know that they learn language, that they are awake and aware after birth, and they're able to recognize their parents and communicate their feelings after a series of weeks, and they are able to make conscious choices. Famous studies include Dr. Seuss reading study where the infants were read stories they heard in utero, and the mechanism was sucking. Infants sucked harder and longer when listening to their mothers read as opposed to other women, so they recognized their parents' voices. Other evidence of the baby's experience in utero includes how babies learn language from listening while developing, and witnessing of the baby batting away the amniocentesis needle, and the increase of fetal heart rate when a mother even thinks about smoking a cigarette. The amazing part is that baby responded to the mother's thoughts and her body's reactions. They're very sensitive to their environment. So how can we help these people, our people, develop in a more peaceful way? We support the parent. Research by Gerhard Schroth and the other Hungarian practitioner Jenő Rafai taught mothers a specific communication sequence with their unborn babies. These mothers experience less trauma at birth and less postpartum depression. Pregnancy researcher Catherine Monk's publications also show that a mother's stress and affective states, such as depression and anxiety, adversely affect the baby. Her work has shown that depression and anxiety during pregnancy can create a pattern of sensitivity in babies. They startle more easily and get overwhelmed with novel stimuli, as opposed to being curious and engaged. Her research also showed that early patterns show up in our teenagers and can possibly be the root of adult disease patterns in immunity, weight management, and cardiovascular health. Our lives are relational from the start. If we bring awareness to pregnancy, support our mothers, with this in mind, our populations will be healthier. The early nervous system is vulnerable and responsive. Our research shows how early responses to information in the environment from the mother and her experiences, the prenatal time, is one of great potential. So supporting our mothers is key. Really, at recognizing the stress management, we can find ways to help our parent recognize their own early adverse experiences with the adverse childhood experiences for parents, really helping them understand the research of Richard Folletti, who saw he could ask a series of 10 questions and get a sense of what had happened for that parent. We also know that we can look at these social determinants of health, racism, poverty, food deserts, and the pandemic, and create programs that will really help our families understand their own nervous system reactions and how they can help themselves in their bodies, even if they can't change their environment. We understand that developmental origins of behavior, health, and disease really do impact how our babies see and recognize what's happening around them. And if we have ways we can soothe and settle parents and bring them to understand that how they are in their bodies does impact how a baby sees and feels themselves, quite unconsciously. The babies develop a lot in utero. We know that their first 12 senses, that sensory array, it starts in the first trimester. The baby has full body responses, including interoception, or how I feel on the inside, and development of early reflexes in the first trimester, or what we call neuroception, is how we see the world through our limbic system, or danger. We're always looking for cues of danger. So that is the autonomic nervous system. It starts with the primitive brain reflexes in the first trimester. Or exteroception, which is perception of the environmental stimuli outside the body, which is visual, acoustic, and tactile. They all begin in the first trimester. So really helping us understand, like, how can we create a really beautiful environment? And that's working with the parents. So this is a quote from Marty Glenn and Wendy M. McCarty from one of their articles published in 2008. A primary period is the most critical period in human development. For brain structures, capacity for resilience, and productivity are all built on this primary foundation. And research has shown that these environmental stressors, such as pregnancy, financial strain, stressful life events, daily hassles, racial discrimination, child abuse and trauma, and domestic violence, and how they're mitigated by any coping resources such as social support, spirituality, and self-efficacy, they can play a role in our psychosocial distress, like how we perceive these things around us. And if we have health behaviors that can grow out of them, hopefully they'll be healthier than what we commonly see for people when they have had these stressors. They can include cigarette use and substance use, sleeplessness or challenges with sleep, and poor food choices. But they can also include good mindfulness practices and exercise. If there's been too much stress, which sometimes stress is not if there's a little stress, that can really help build resilience. But we found that our immune system can get very much impacted by stress as a baby, as we're developing, or even as a human without being pregnant or being a baby in utero. But with maternal health, it can really impact birth outcomes and fetal development, including preeclampsia, susceptibility to infectious illness and wound healing, birth outcomes, and fetal development. So what we're trying to create are ways that we can support our families. And one of them is to help families recognize when they've had trauma themselves. So that is that adverse childhood experiences, or we can develop different threshing tools to be with parents using a trauma-informed care, trauma-sensitive intakes, ways to help families feel better in their bodies, either during pregnancy or before pregnancy. So our traumatic experiences become stored in our bodies, and we can become disconnected from our true nature. And pregnancy and bringing a child into the world is an ideal moment, a very big threshold moment. And many parents are inspired to make changes at this time. And we can bring them into relationship to hurt parts inside themselves that never got acknowledged. And now they wake up and they want to be remembered. But it can establish itself as a spin. So we need to develop a relationship with that part, reclaim the consciousness that we lost, and help integrate it into who we are now. This is the work that I do as a somatic trauma therapist, and I work with families and babies in particular. But I also work with adults that have earliest trauma. I've developed a program called Family Care, and in this program, we can really begin to establish the roots of world peace by caring for the family with a conscious preconception, interventions, trauma-sensitive intake, and prenatal supportive connection and safety. In the program and in any program, we can really help families create an intentional space or welcoming a new baby, and you welcome that family. So it's a way that we as providers can really help a family feel, how is it to feel intentionally welcomed and wanted? To introduce or help families consciously conceive babies so that they feel wanted. Recognition of the history of strengths and challenges in the family lineage. So we take a history, we get them to recognize where their challenges are, to bring patterns to consciousness. They may not even know that they're living in a trauma vortex, or that they've been influenced by the histories, whether in their present family or in the previous. Like one of the patterns that I work with families is to recognize their own attachment sequence. And we can really work to help differentiate from history in the ancestors if it's been overwhelming. Then create kinds of buffering protection and connection for that history. Often it's just teaching about differentiation and recognizing when we're caught up in the spin of the history. We teach about the nervous system, about self and co-regulation, and finding safe people to be with, and what does that feel like in our body. And we also can teach about prenatal bonding, connecting with the baby. We know that these practices will decrease the amount of birth interventions that are needed, and that will increase the amount of self-efficacy that families feel after birth. And it has also a wide variety of other wonderful indicators and outcomes that I'll go through in a minute. We also try to introduce in birthing practices more gentle birthing and more sensitive caregiving. We found that if the first 2 months after birth, a parent can be really sensitive to their baby, that baby does better. And also ways that sensitive caregiving in the first 2 years of life can really change and mitigate any challenges that a family has had. Very specifically, we work with what we call angels, ghosts, and echoes. So angels are resources that show up as people most of the time. They're people that played a really pivotal role in our lives. In the birthing process, they can be nurses or midwives or people who really helped that birth. Sometimes for people, they're their animals. And if they're not animals, then they or people, they can be places around their house outside where they felt safe. So I spend time with people helping them find these, what we call angels in their history. And then there's ghosts, echoes, and ghosts. We have found that being with birthing families when they get pregnant, if there are any historical, what we call ghosts or things in their ancestry or in the previous generation, they can play a role in fears and concerns during pregnancy. So ghosts are imprints from family history or past ambient culture that influence the now. So if in pregnancy there are difficult prenatal or birth experiences, often they can show up as ghosts, such as baby losses, parent losses, or other major challenges during pregnancy or during birth or after birth. So we've learned to harvest, to try to listen to see if there are any ghosts that are influencing the current pregnancy, or family patterns such as, well, we only have C-sections in our family, or even if it's a joke, it can show up and have a way of influencing adversely influencing outcomes. And also trauma echoes, if there are trauma echoes from the parents that show up and influence the birth, baby, or the pre-perinatal time. These are those adverse experiences that can happen when we are children, or even in young adulthood if we've been assaulted. So we're listening for how that parent who's pregnant or supporting the pregnancy might have any kind of perception that might be influencing this pregnancy and birth, and finding good, gentle ways to help integrate those challenges. We use trauma-informed care, which recognizes the wide impact of trauma and understands that there's impacts for recovery. We recognize signs and symptoms. This is the training that I've gone through. It responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and we seek to actively resist re-traumatization. One of the tools that we use is called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, that broke up early experiences into 3 categories. And the first category is physical abuse. The second category is neglect. And the third is household dysfunction. And even though this research has gone through a variety of criticisms from different populations, because the original study of 7,000 was mostly white and middle class, we do know that there are patterns that we can start to recognize. And all of these start with actually preconception. And we can see how our neurodevelopment gets disrupted, or we can have developmental needs that were not met. We can see that they can show up in different patterns through social, emotional, and cognitive ways that we deal with the world. We can have then risky behaviors that develop, and then diseases can develop out of these early adverse experiences. One of the things I've really liked about the impact of this study is that they've come out now with more compassionate messages about addiction, but it is a pretty big concern. So in trauma-informed care and healing, we ask, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. That's the compassionate approach. And for further healing, we can help people make sense of what happened. That's what creates this buffering protection. So really creating the idea that there is a recognition and understanding of what happened. We can start preconception and really be there for parents, creating safe spaces for them to connect with each other and get support and connect for their unborn babies. Recognizing that memory in our bodies gets laid down in the womb, starting with how we build our bodies and how our brain develops, how we make 50,000 neurons per second, especially in that second trimester, and that these memories get laid down in the neurons of these the nuclei of these neurons, and that once they start connecting with each other, this is where we can make the difference when we're working after the labor and delivery, but really helping families recognize that even before they get pregnant, if they could bring their own patterns to consciousness, and then really recognizing that the babies also are recording information, recording that ways that they can perceive the world through what's happened for their parents. Again, looking at how learning happens in the womb through the sensory array that develops starting first trimester. So there are best practices that we know in prenatal bonding. These are three of our prenatal bonding gurus, I guess we'd call them, or major researchers: Renee Vandekar, Beatrice Manrique, and Gerhard Schroth. But the prenatal bonding as a model, it began in the 1980s. Then with Renee Vandekar, who was an obstetrician, he developed the Prenatal University and found really communication and simple games and music as a way of bonding with babies. Beatriz Manrique is from Venezuela. She developed Make Way for Baby. And they've all found that these ways of connecting with the baby increased their IQ and better neurological development, better mental and motor development, easier labors, more capacity for visual and auditory stimuli, and then increased, all their sensory capacities have they're very much more robust, with better sight and hearing and better reactions to stressful situations. And then Gerhard Schroth, he had really wonderful positive outcomes with his research as he continued the work of Jenna Rafai, which is really connecting with babies starting second trimester. This is one of his slides that he's allowed me to use that looked at how these babies who were connected with his program, Prenatal Bonding BA, that they really, this column on the left is the one where they show the research, how babies were born before week 37, there was a decrease in prematurity, and then a decrease in birth without any birth interventions, so births were better, decrease in cesarean sections, and in non-clinical birth, breastfeeding after birth, which I really loved seeing that, especially breastfeeding after 6 months, 92% as opposed to 22%. These are really amazing statistics. We're looking at a decrease in postpartum depression and in what they call baby blues, and even an increase in satisfaction with their mate, with their partner. So really starting with when they first come to you as a client, if we could, in our ways of working with maternity care, really take a good history with questions about what happened to them when they were little or what may be influencing them from their ancestors. Creating what we call preconception space with 1 to 3 sessions where you prepare your parent or for parenting by recognizing challenges and strengths and realizing that for many women and some men too, 1 in 3 women reporting a history of assault. So assuming that there's trauma in that space, you want to create a safe space for families. So really begin to look at, for you, like what does creating a safe space mean? So just take a minute and write that down for yourself. So trauma-sensitive intake, it starts with space and your presence. How you listen, how you attend to what they're saying, your curiosity, your genuine, authentic care, your flexibility, and your mutual respect. Stories from the history in our families can linger in the background of pregnancy. It's a time of when families can really make a change. And often these stories from their ancestors will be haunting. They'll show up and they'll be in this space, but not as explicit. Our job is to help make them more explicit and then integrate them. So you are listening to the stories with your ears and your body. You're listening to the impact of it, what is said and what is not being said. And you're attending to how it feels to be in the room with them. Is there lots of fear or confusion or doubt? Are there stories with common themes, which I often see when there's histories that need to be integrated? Betrayals or feelings of not enough, not there, or urgency or never ending. There's a feeling of never ending. It's not going to ever get better. So you want to help your person feel seen, heard, felt safe, and protected, and connecting them with what we call angels in the history. This is based on the research of Angela Narayan, whom I have a picture of in the next slide. And she really helped create tools that would help mitigate any ghosts in the history. So who was there for them? Try and harvest from them. Was there a woman or a parent, a grandparent, a grandfather, anybody who they felt really loved by? Is there maybe a neighbor or a teacher or a spiritual mentor or pastor? Really helping families connect with their spirituality and things that help them when they come under stress or have distress. What messages are helpful to them? And if they've had previous births, who helped them there? But these feelings of goodness help stabilize, create flow, coherency, and connection to what's naturally strong in them. It can decrease distress and then allows for hope and the feeling of goodness to shine through. These are the people that have helped create some of these feelings based on their own research. Angela Narayan and then Michael Trout, who's also written about angels in our history. So when it comes to helping integrate the overwhelming experiences, I don't have time to tell you about those today, but I work by listening to the stories and helping them integrate their challenges, helping establish good coherent or good sense of what feels good in our bodies. I use the felt sense and towards what's more challenging. So this line here represents threshold moments. That what's below it can feel nurturing, nourishing, good for ourselves, more stabilizing, more doable. When it gets above the range or below that range, it can feel very overwhelming, or we can feel numb or shut down. So I help mitigate or integrate these overwhelming feelings by moving from these good feelings into something more challenging and back. This kind of what we call pendulation or deepening and broadening allows any fixed states that are challenging, overwhelming, to integrate into our bodies, and so that we can more adequately or even enjoyably welcome a new baby. My tools are practitioner skills, touch, and a series of principles that we've developed in our work. I also want to really support the midwifery model of care. We have a saying about midwifery, which is much more prevalent around the world than in our country of the United States. We call it with and wise. Any kind of care that takes care of pregnant people that watches over them, keeps them company, is very caring, and interfaces with a team of providers that can really help that person feel held, is part of the midwifery model. We call with and wise. In the wisdom of the midwife, there's a lot of educational training that will help a family feel held on every level, listening and creating rapport and balancing medical needs with the parents' and families' wishes. We know from research that families experience better outcomes when midwives can practice to their full capacity and are part of the system. So in marginalized communities in the US and also I think around the world, I think there's much better use of midwifery, where a health system is often stretched thin. Expanding access to midwives and increasing their responsibility could be a feasible strategy for improving maternity care. Overall, with midwives integrated into our maternity care, we would have higher rates of vaginal births and breastfeeding. You would have a decrease in C-sections and other poor outcomes for births. So with our approach to helping families, we call giving these families roots and wings. So we have our opportunity to prepare the ground, being able to see that these roots that we talked about earlier, we can make sure that the soil that they grow in and all those layers are really attended to in a good way from the very beginning. And then we welcome families as we would like for them to welcome their babies with tender care, but also strength. We know how to do a quality income intake, how be able to help them feel that we recognize their strengths as well as their challenges. And we create safety with our own presence. How we receive them makes a lot of difference. We are weaving a nest, and in that nest is accessibility, deep, respectful, non-judgmental listening, collaborative care with other providers, and also an appreciation of how a history of disordered attachment affects the way in which pregnancy women interface with providers. So we create a feeling of secure attachment with the family, so that they can feel what that feels like and build trust. We begin at the beginning, laying down the roots of health. So imagining a world where parents and babies thrive, we have good birth outcomes, peaceful, cooperative, empowered cultures, stress managed for a greater enjoyable life, connected relationships, happy families, and equal treatment for better outcomes for all people. It's a new model of care that starts preconception. It includes the baby's experience, and if there has been something overwhelming, we address that birth trauma immediately, and we support parents so they feel held, seen, and understood, and that whatever overwhelming thing comes up, we can integrate. We also address early roots of health and also anything overwhelming for parents. So we call that addressing the baby within. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk in this world peace effort, and I hope I see you again.